Hi, I'm Rasheed Ogunlaru, coach, speaker, and author, and welcome to this, the latest in my Soul Leader interview series. Each episode, I interview a really fascinating person in and around the world of leadership. And today, I'm not going to disappoint you because I have a fellow coach, a fellow author, and consultant, Cherron Inko-Tariah, who's here, and I have her book here, and she's behind, she has the book behind her. So, Cherron, how are you doing today?
I'm great. I'm really good. I'm really excited to have a conversation with you today about leadership, and thank you for sharing the book.
Thank you very much. And I should have said, so sorry, I've got the MBE. So Cherron, I mean, for people who don't know, I want to say a few words, but it'd be then interesting to hear how you kind of would describe yourself. But for many people, I know that many people do see you as a leader in the realm of staff networks, or as some people call them, employee resource groups or affinity groups. Can I just start off by asking you, and your leader in that you led the way, you wrote this book, you were talking about things like the role that those groups can play in organizations. You also play a role in leading the way in, there's a National Day for Staff Networks, which I'm part of the team with yourself. But when you hear the word leader, what does the word leader mean to you? And do you see yourself as a leader?
Really great question. Here's the thing. I've often described myself as a reluctant leader, and I'll explain why. Because I cut my teeth in the working world in the civil service, and of course the leaders there are there by seniority, so they're in a particular grade, and they have the position and all the power that comes with that. And because I wasn't at that grade, I didn't consider myself a leader in that traditional sense. However, that being said, over the years, I've come to know that, a leader is someone that's trying to guide others to a particular purpose, to something that's going to benefit them and have a beneficial outcome regardless. As opposed to being a manager, which most of these people were. They were actually managers, just trying to help the organization achieve its goals. But because they understood the processes and the procedures, and they could lead people in achieving those processes and procedures, they were considered a leader. But I find that a leader is much more than that. It's much more than that. And it's not really to do with your seniority at all. And it's about, you, the person, what drives you, what your values are, and whether people connect to those values. That's what I found over the years that's happened.
Did you, in those years when you were in the civil service, did you have aspirations to be the kind of leader who would lead staff and so on? And when did leading emerge for you? Because I love the things that you put on the table here, because there's the people who, as you say, that actually are managers, the staff and all of that kind of stuff, but they're not necessarily leading and so on. Did you have, because maybe it's worth us maybe putting on the table again, isn't it? There are people who, yes, they have staff and they're a manager and they should be a leader if they've got people who they're responsible for and so on. And then you've got other people who perhaps may be leading on projects, pieces of work and so on, which I'd imagine that a lot of your work would have been involved in, persuading the senior. What was your journey, and did you have an interest in leading people, having staff and so on? Or was it for you always about leading on projects or leading on things with a purpose to have a broader outcome? What's been your journey with all of that?
Yeah, it's been varied. I've been in a position where I've led a group of people, but then I didn't see myself as the leader. I just saw myself as, if something went wrong, they could come to me and I would help fix it.
Were you their line manager?
I was their line manager, yeah. So if something went well, I would celebrate and make sure I'd acknowledge that. But at the same time, I used to be a HR, I used to lead a team in HR, for example. And at that time, I realized that none of them were qualified. And I thought, no. So I saw my role as leaving them better than I found them. And I guess that's what I've always taken that on board. If I take on a project or I'm working with a team for a particular time, how can I leave them better than I found it? Just what I mean, whether that's achieving the project to a high standard, making sure they're qualified, making sure they understand their role better. So that's always what's driven me to make sure, you know, what can I bring to the table and leave a legacy, I guess. You know,
where did that? I'm fascinated by that, and I'm fascinated to know where that began. And it's great that you've also now put on the table of all these things that we'll explore. You put on the table this thing around that you worked in HR, so you've got lots of differing perspectives on those who lead in organization, because when we're talking about here in Soul Leader, most of the people who will be watching this, listening to this and so on, will be people who, however they perceive themselves, supervisor, manager, leader, executive, whatever, senior executive, within an organization. So you've got that HR perspective, which is fascinating. And of course, now you're a consultant, trainer, coach, etc. But where for you did this, you've talked about this thing about leaving things also better. And where did all of that begin? Was it there in early childhood? Was it there once you knew what you wanted to do professionally as a career? Was it there? Was it linked to you wanting to work in the civil service? Where did that sense of purpose?
It's a really good question. I think it came from school.
Right.
Our school motto was Serviam, which means to serve.
Right.
And
were you a head girl? Why have I got a feeling you were important in the? Were you a head girl or something like that?
Something like that.
Can you tell us? Because then that's interesting too for our viewers.
Well, this is what I mean when I said I've been a reluctant leader, because sometimes, you know, it's one of those questions. What would you tell your 15-year-old self? I would tell my 15-year-old self, just embrace your leadership. Because, you know, I've been ducking and diving from this thing, and it comes up over and over again. So in school, yes, I did have a senior position.
What was that position?
I was deputy head girl of a school, and I was also captain of my netball team. So I had these positions of leadership, and you know, both roles were taken very seriously. But throughout, from the moment we put on our uniform, we're told about serviam, about the importance of being prepared to serve, because the school was run by an Ursuline order of nuns, and that was something that they pushed forward. I mean, don't get me wrong, I wasn't always in that mode of serving all the time, but it did kind of open up this thing about doing something to help others, or doing something that's going to be more beneficial just than beyond yourself. And I guess the seeds were sown at that time. And if I look back, it kind of just carried all the way through.
Really amazing. I mean, I think what's really fascinating, the things that you're saying here, Cherron, because I think that then these themes, the reluctant leader and this thing around service, are really interesting, because if we fast forward now, many people know, I mean, there'll be many people who will know you from your time in the civil service, but many perhaps might even now know you more through the work that you've done with staff networks, National Day for Staff Networks, Power of Staff Networks, the book, etc. This thing about reluctant leader is really interesting, isn't it? Because no doubt you meet with, through your work, and particularly things like staff networks and so on, people who perhaps some of them might be in a way reluctant leader, or it might be an inadvertent kind of leader, isn't it? Those people. So I'm really fascinated by this theme, because of course, if my career's been such, I'm working in a team and I've had a promotion, then I know that with that title, like you've had the staff and that responsibility of leading and developing comes with it. But there are some people where that wasn't necessarily their journey. They're leading on projects, or in the space of like staff networks, where there's might be something they're passionate about, and all of a sudden nobody wants to do it to lead this.
Yes.
So can you tell us a little bit about, do you meet lots of other people who are reluctant leaders, be it they are a manager with the title with responsible for people, or that they have a role like somebody who leads a staff network where it is an additional thing that they do, and it just, what comes with it is influencing, perhaps having a team of people? Do you meet many reluctant leaders?
Yeah, and I'm going to use this in two ways. On the one hand, you have someone who's reluctant to be a leader because they recognize the work that they need to put in, and they're not quite ready for that. Even though they're capable, they're not quite ready for the responsibility. But then you have others who are just doing it. They're doing it and they're doing it well, but they don't see themselves as a leader, and therefore they're reluctant to give themselves that title.
Yes.
And I think a lot of network leaders fall into the second category. They're doing it because they're passionate. Often they don't have the training. They just know that they've experienced something. They don't want anyone else to experience it. They want to give others a chance to share and to support. So they want to create this environment, and they want to be the ones to say, it's going to be okay, or let's raise this. But when I tell them, you're actually, what type of leader are you? They look at me like I've asked them this most ridiculous question, because they don't see themselves as leaders. They see themselves as someone who just brings people together and try to make work better for this group of people.
Yes.
And I'm like, I don't know what else you expect a leader to be doing, but that's what a leader does.
Really
So
powerful.
it's
I love
really
that.
getting them to understand that it's about mindset and how they see themselves. Because don't forget, a lot of organizations, networks are in organizations where there's a hierarchy. And then leadership is a title that's attached to people in certain positions. And if you're not at that position, then you do not see yourself.
Do you think that that's because I was intrigued by that? And I love, by the way, just going back a little, the thing that you highlight, there are some people who might be reluctant or might not call themselves a leader because they might not feel ready for that thing yet, or it might be not what they're looking for, and others who are doing it anyway, but they just wouldn't ascribe that title to them. Do you think that many people who are, let's say, fall into this category, do you think it's because of so much of this hierarchy that it is that they might be reluctant to lead or to ascribe that title to themselves, or just to think, I don't want anything to do with that? I mean, do you have a view on that? Do you think that sometimes all of this hierarchy stuff stops some people who are incredibly talented from even going further in what could be their leadership career and achieving more? Do you think that that can play out?
I think, I don't know if it's the hierarchy alone.
Yeah.
I think there is a degree of that.
Yes.
However, there's also something around, we become institutionalized in organizations, or some people do. And so they will convince themselves that they can't do something, even though there's no evidence to support that. And so it's sometimes it's a cultural thing, an organizational cultural thing, that prevents or doesn't encourage people to see themselves as a leader. So to me, it has to come, you have to do a bit of a deep dive and understand, well, what is leadership? What type of leader am I? And do I do this well? And for you to be really bold and brave enough to say, actually, I am a leader. I may not be a leader in this way, but I am a leader. And it's about being prepared to test some of those things that we tell ourselves. And I'm speaking as someone from experience. I told myself a lot of things, but when you sift it through, it's a lot of emotion. But when you sift it through for the facts, there aren't any facts there to back up what you think. And so it causes you to just like, oh, let me reset how I'm seeing things. So I think it's not just the hierarchy, there's a bit of culture and there's a bit of self-doubt as well that kicks in.
And it's interesting, that stuff about that organization and the culture and so on. Maybe that's a good place for us to go to, because again, as we touched on, you've seen this from a number of perspectives. HR, when you worked in HR, you've seen it now when you go in as a consultant or trainer, facilitator, and so on. What would be your, and again, a non-executive director as well, when you look in at organizations and you look in, and no doubt I can imagine that you look at them often from all sorts of different lenses, sometimes from the governance, sometimes from the networks, from what the very senior leaders should be doing. Do you have a take on what organize? This is a very wide question, so do forgive me with it. But do you have a take on what organizations, generally speaking, could be doing a little bit better in terms of developing their leaders and people to see themselves as leaders and their talent pool, and those people who could be really good leaders overall? I know it's a very, very broad question, but because you have all of these different lenses, and I ask it because sometimes that thing around developing people, it's the job of learning development or the education team or somebody's manager, or, is the organization setting the right context to it, or it's going to, but very often, where even often when people often talk about their organization talent, often there isn't a very, very clear and rounded and equitable way in which that's kind of done. So I'd love do you have any general observations in terms of organizations and what you think is important perhaps to create that kind of climate? I know that's a really broad question. Any thoughts on that at all?
Yeah, it's pretty broad. I guess for me, there is something about understanding, and I know this is going to be really basic, but the amount of times I think it's missed. There's something about understanding that talent comes in all forms, and it's not just the one lens that a lot of organizations assume talent comes in. And I think sometimes they miss out on drafting talent because they're blinded by what they think talent should look like and sound like. So I think there's something around being really intentional about identifying the talent in your organization. There's something around understanding that some people just want to work in your organization because they like it and they just want to do a good job and they want to go home. But there are others who are ambitious and are keen to go higher and further in your organization. And therefore it's for you to ensure that there are things there that they can devise themselves on. They can actually say, yeah, I can do this or I can do that, and feel that they are being invested in, from their employer. And then there's the final thing is for the individual themselves to do that, to do their own development. Do you understand? There's something around them recognizing, well, actually, I'm not getting what I need from the organization. Do I need to do a course? Do I need to go out, step outside? What is it? I don't think it's solely for the employer. I think we as individuals need to think about, well, what do we want? So I think there's a role for everyone in this, and you're not going to please everyone. I hear that. You can't please everyone. But if you can say, as a board, are we doing enough to ensure that those who want to progress can, and those who just want to do a good job is acknowledged? And do we allow people to invest in themselves and give them the time to do what they need to do? Do you see what I mean? Because people will leave your organization. But here's the thing, you want people to leave well. We want you to leave the organization well, because what that does, it means they could come back with more experience, more talent, more innovation that's going to help you. So it's really thinking about how do we make sure that we want the best for our people. And I would say to anyone listening to this and you're a leader, what lessons did you learn from COVID? What lessons did you learn from COVID? Because if we sit down, there was a lot we had to navigate because of COVID-19. And the savvy organization picked up on the fact we need to know about the employee voice, hence ERGs and staff networks. We need to understand better about well-being and mental health, hence why we've got these mental health first aiders. We need to understand how hybrid working is going to work better for us and what more we can do with that. So there's some lessons that did we lose money because of COVID? Some may have not. Did we lose excellence? No, because people did work harder during COVID, I think. So I think there's lessons that we can learn.
Absolutely, and I think that's really richly answered. And I think that in all of those things that you said that we learned was the importance of the person who leads, and all of us, and is that thing about really looking out for each other, which leads a lovely segue to the heart element of this interview around soul leaders. So, what place would you say in your own journey has, let's put a number of heart, compassion, kindness, care? What place has that? What place has that taken in your own career? Because some people might think about, and I know that maybe you might paint a little bit more of the picture of it, but like in the civil service, people might think, it's one of those places where it might be very, 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 very serious, and and all the, and maybe the people might think there's not that much place for that. So when what place has that heart and following your heart and being a compassionate leader played in your career, and when did it first emerge, and what do you think of when you even hear those words?
Compassionate leader, gosh, it's got a lot of variations to that, isn't it? So I think there's two sides to being a compassionate leader. There's one about showing compassion to your staff during those times when they need you to show compassion. But there's also, and I'm going to speak to this as a female and as a Black female and as a dark-skinned Black female, there's about showing compassion to yourself. because I have to pay a number of taxes, shall we say, when I'm walking into the workplace. And because of that, you could be hard on yourself, or if you're not the first, or if you don't, get the highest grade or whatever. So sometimes we can be extra hard on ourselves. And there's something around showing compassion and giving ourselves a bit of a break, which I've had to learn how to do. So for me, there's two aspects to it. But to go back to being a heart-centered leader, I think when you care about people, and what do I mean by care? I mean, you care about the people that's in your team, like, are they okay? Do they have any inclusion needs? Are they enjoying the work? What's next? And where do they, when you show a genuine interest that you want the best for your staff, that's one aspect. When they're going through some of those tough moments that life throws at them, and you can extend a bit of compassion by being flexible with how they work, or giving them the time that they need to grieve, or whatever the case may be. But there's also something around when things go wrong as a team, how you deal with that as a leader. Because a lot of the time there's someone, you're looking for someone to blame, but it's those moments when you can really show heart-centered leadership, that you can really demonstrate, okay, what happened? Did we hurt anyone today? What can we do better tomorrow? What can we learn from this? And it's about, let's move on this together. Let's move on. Let's learn from this together. Let's move away from the competition and the finger pointing, and move away from that. I think it's those moments when we really test whether we've got heart-centered leadership. It's easy to be heart-centered when everyone's getting along and everything's fine, but in those moments when there's adversity and the storms of work impact on the team, that's when it becomes really important.
And I like that point that you made, that powerful point that you made, and the phrase that you put it on the taxes that certain people might wear, because of gender, their background, their ethnicity, their sexuality, their faith, and there'll be so many different ways, and or thinking differently, or there might be so many different ways in that. I mean, and I guess that this leads us richly into the realm of some of the work that you do with the staff networks. And I've still got this term, this reluctant leader, in my consciousness, because I think it's a very, 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 I think it's a really, really powerful one. What about the person who's feeling, and perhaps they might have some of those characteristics or other characteristics or all of those characteristics or what have you, and they're thinking, yeah, I'm reluctant because I'm wanting to make a change here, but the taxes that I'm having to pay are too high. People aren't seeing me, or they're putting on more blocks, or it's this or that, or I'm always having to be the person who's the expert on this, or, and who has got all of this talent stuff that they've got to share. Cherron, and do you hear those kind of voices sometimes in your journey? Because that can be tough, isn't it? That can add on why lots of people are reluctant, or perhaps they've got to one level of leadership, but they might think, I've tried and I've tried and I've tried, and I'm still here. I mean, I hear these stories all the time. I've been in this role now for the last 20 years, and I can tell this person could be here, I can hear from just being with them for a little while in this workshop, this masterclass, whatever, that I could do more. Have you got any tips for that kind of person who might be feeling very reluctant because they feel, yeah, maybe that leadership was there in me, but it's been burned out, or my, do you know what I mean? Any words of advice to that person, especially if they still care? Because I guess, Cherron, that there might be some cases in which it's very clear cut that that person thinks, I'm leaving this organization and so on. But sometimes it's more complicated like that, because perhaps like yourself, they really do care, and they might really care about that work of that organization or that body, or they're in the public sector, or it might be a big organization that they're in. You and I do lots of work, for example, in the civil service, and it's just big organizations. I think, no, I want to remain a public servant. I want to remain in this thing. I want to remain in charity. But have you got any advice for the person who's listening to you, Cherron, and they're thinking, I really like what you're saying, but you know what? Maybe I need to stay this reluctant because it's just too tough. Any thoughts? Any things you'd say?
I mean, one of the questions I would have to ask is, how prepared are you to live with regret? Because if you're not going to do anything and you're comfortable with that, fine. But most of the time we're not going to be comfortable with that. So I would say don't do something or don't not do something and then regret it. You know, you say, I wish I would have done, because that's not gonna, it just not. So that's one of the questions I would ask. Another question I would have to say, or another thing I would say, you know, what will have to happen for you to be so uncomfortable for you to start moving? You see what I mean? Because with that, for me, that's what happened. I became so uncomfortable that I had to start looking at options. And one of those options is, have I told myself a narrative? Yeah, that I've started to believe over the years, because we do. A narrative starts to create and form, and we start to believe this. And you need someone to literally, well, not literally, but to throw a bucket of cold water and say, wake up, you're telling yourself this falsehood. So there's something around, again, assessing whether there's any truth in this narrative that you've spoken to yourself. So, who's around you? Who's your cheerleaders? Who's challenging you? Have you got the mentor or the coach? Could you be doing something differently? Because, you know, sometimes we want to bring a change. We want to bring a change our way rather than what's needed. So, you know, one thing I say to network leaders is, sometimes the challenge that you have is that you're trying to do two things in one way. You're trying to lead change and lead people, but you need to do both of those kind of differently. But, you know, you're bearing in mind that they come together at some point. But how you lead people and how you lead change are two different things. So there's something around, do you understand how to navigate some of those barriers? Do you need support to do that? And then, yeah, what other options exist to you? Is there an outlet that you could volunteer and maybe help to bring change in a different way, so that at least you're getting you're pouring out and getting getting that satisfaction, but from another avenue. It doesn't all have to be in the workplace. It can be in a volunteering organization, or working with younger people, or anything like that. So I'd throw a whole range of things out there just to see what's going to land better.
Really interesting. There's a question I was going to ask you before, and it's come back to my mind, so I'll ask it now because it's really interesting. Which, if either of these words, do you sit with you? Campaigner or leader? Did you feel that at some point? You know, because I'm still struck by this reluctant leader thing. Did you see yourself far more as like a campaign? Because I meet some people, I can think of somebody we both know, and she's wonderful in organization, and she's got energy and thingy, and she's a real campaigner. She's a lobbyer. She does this, she does that. She leads as well. But so I'm wondering, did you feel? Which of those words sit with you? You might say, no, I don't see myself either of those. Do you see where I'm getting at? And do you recognize any of that thing, a campaigner?
So campaigner or leader?
Yeah, campaigner or leader. It doesn't need to be either or, but I'm wondering if at certain points you might have just more resonated with the word campaigner or so on.
No, I want a campaigner. No, when you hear the word campaign, you immediately think of placards, don't you? And someone standing, marching, and saying, "No, you know."
Activist, and some people have that thing, activist.
Activist again. So unfortunately, these are really powerful roles, but they do have sometimes a negative connotation attached to them, which I think is really unfair, because a campaigner is someone who's trying to drive change or raise a campaign because there's an injustice or something. So I would say, neither. I would not call myself a campaigner or a leader.
But it's interesting. But again, it's interesting. Well, tell us then. This is something else that might make you blush. Also, the MBE. Can you tell us a little bit about that? When did that come from? I know it's always services to this or services to that, and so. Can you tell us a little bit about that, about that, and how it felt? Because again, what I think wonderfully jumps out. One of the reasons I was so keen to interview Cherron is that we know, and I've met so many of them, people who they do what they do, or they lead, or have you, because it needs to be done, because they're passionate about it. It is not about their own aggrandizement. I know you fall into that category, and so I'd love to know. Tell us a little bit about the MBE.
Well, the MBE is really special because it was in the citation. It quotes two things. It quotes the services to Her Majesty's government, you know, the civil service, but it's also about my work with young people in the faith community. So it was a double, a double recognition. And like many people, when you get this envelope on your doorstep, it was a complete shock. You think someone's playing a prank on you, and it tells you that you can't say anything, so you can't phone up anyone and say, did you just? So it's a very surreal moment. It's very, because you're like, it takes you a while for it to sink in, and then you've got to do all the paperwork. However, in terms of how it made me feel, it made me, the only way I can describe it is when I went to collect it, to even talking about it, you just get chills.
When you went to Buckingham Palace.
When I went to Buckingham Palace to collect it, you feel that it's, even though it's your name, even though it's you feel that you're collecting it on behalf of all those others who may not get a mention, who may not be selected for an MBE. So you feel that you're taking all these others with you. And the amount of people that came up to me and said, Cherron, I know it's you, but I feel like it's me, because it was somebody they could relate to, who looks like them, who's just normal, everyday like them, getting this prized award. So hearing that was lovely, and going up there and they're calling out your name and you do all of this stuff, you're like, this is on behalf of everyone who may never get recognized, who's doing phenomenal work. So I felt a huge sense of responsibility collecting that award and accepting it. So yeah, did that make me see myself as a leader? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Did it make me feel recognized? Definitely.
Did after you had those letters there, because it's interesting, isn't it? Because sometimes, with certain things, it's like somebody becomes a pop star or this or that. How people start treating them differently. Did people treat you differently? And the reason why I'm keen to ask these kind of questions is that I'm really interested, again, in how people see and perceive you now. And when people look to you, it could be through the MBE, or it could be through the book or certain bits of work, or that you lead on the national, that sometimes people look to you for counsel or what have you. Have you become very aware of that journey, and how do you feel about that? Because that is one of the things in terms of leadership, isn't it? That over time, people do look to you, they seek out your counsel, they value it, which is great, it's wonderful. But there's lots of stuff to that. So tell us, especially for the reluctant leader, right? Because there's some people like, yeah, bring it on, I want that title, I want that role, I want this and that, do you know what I mean? Tell us a little bit about that journey, Cherron. So with the MBE and the work that with staff networks, and but by all means, if you want to say a word about why that began, because there might have been, again, something that's very significant that you're wanting to say in terms of taking that lead in terms of this area of work. So back over to you about that journey.
It was, did some people treat me differently? Of course, not my family and my close friends, but yeah, there were lots of people that were curious, shall we say. So there was a lot of, it's interesting when they find out that you've got these post-nominals, their eyebrows always go up. Ooh, there's always and that in itself says, oh, I'm going to speak to you differently now because I now know that you've got this thing. And you're like, and a part of me just like, just talk to me like you always do. I try to encourage people, I'm just Cherron, don't, yes, I've got, I've got this, but it's just, I just try to meet them where they're at on the level. Imagine if you meet someone who's famous and they sit down and have a cup of tea and you're just talking to them like you would do someone else. You think, wow, they're really down to earth. That's what I want. I am down to earth. And so,
what about the responsibility bit? That's great. So that, that bit of just that human, but what about, yeah, has there a sense, especially since, I mean, I think I can't remember how many years I've known you. I would have been probably very young. How many years have I known you? But how many, has it been, I can't remember, 10, 8 years, 9?
Yeah, about that, yeah.
So I would have been incredibly young at the time, so I'm joking. But no, but tell me a little bit about that. But at that time, remember when we met, you were in this, I think I met you just before around the book and so on. And so in that period of time, you've been taking a lead on the work of staff networks, employee resource groups. And when you began, they were, it's fair to say, certainly in the UK, they were newer, they were emerging, there weren't as many of them as they certainly are now, et cetera, et cetera. Can you tell us why you took that lead, and has there been a pressure or expectation with leading in that particular kind of space? Can you just tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, reluctant leader, which means that's how I see myself. But people still see me as a leader, and I just had to accept that. And so with that came with this responsibility to make sure that what I'm sharing is of good practice, of good high standard. It's going to be practical. It's based on research and so on. So I understood the power of the words, especially if I'm delivering a speech or doing a presentation. I wanted to make sure that how I left them would again make them feel empowered and have a better understanding. In terms of the broader thought leadership type of role that I've seen to be slipped into, that has taken me a while to get into, because I just see myself as Cherron, who's written a book. But for others, it's like, wow, you wrote a book when nobody knew that they needed this book.
And to be fair, isn't it? And all the and because I happen to know, all that, and all the work in terms of week in and week out, being in that field with leaders and with networks and understanding and seeing the issues and helping develop them, talking with them, all of that expertise that comes with something like that. I mean, it makes me, forgive me, but one of the things that jumps into my mind is that I wonder if some of the stuff that can happen for many people in this space is that there is something about, and I'm talking about just people who lead, particularly those people who, don't need the fanfare and all of that, is sometimes people don't necessarily see the stuff that it is that they've done or take that time to note it, whereas other people are noting every single thing that they've ever done and what have you. So I just wondered if do you have any thoughts on that? And forgive me, there might be other things you're still wanting to say about how it is that people look in on and that responsibility with that kind of leadership.
So whether I'm promoting what I'm doing, or whether
I just wonder, and sorry, yeah, I'm interested in almost like two paths at the same time. Maybe the first path is that any more things you want to say about that responsibility that comes with certain types of leadership? Maybe that's the first question we should look at, because there will be some roles, and we both see them, isn't it? Be it that it's a role like yours, Cherron, where, okay, yes, you're offered this particular book, you lead, you establish National Day for Staff Networks, and people will see you as a key player, a thought leader in that field. But equally, there are other people you've worked with in your role. Their title often, they're the chief executive, they're the chair of the board, they are a very senior leader, they're leading on this particular, there's a particular kind of responsibility for those people. And what your thoughts on that kind of thing, about that weight of responsibility that some people can feel, whether they're leading on a project or whether they're leading an organization, as we see often in the NHS, where there might be many thousands of staff, for example?
I think one of my roles is, when I speak to leaders, sometimes they just need someone that they can trust to just share some stuff, expose a little bit of vulnerability, which they know won't go anywhere else. So there's a little bit of there's a lot of that goes on, to be honest with you. And then there's some gentle challenge that I come and bring in, like, well, where did you get that from? And what is it you're trying to achieve? And why is that important to you? Is it important to you, or is it important to you because of the organization you work in? So there's something around helping them to unpick, why did you get into this in the first place? What is it you want to see happening as a result of your leadership? Do you know what I mean? So sometimes they take on responsibility for things because maybe the predecessor's done that, or maybe that's what they assume they need to do, without sitting down and asking themselves some really pertinent questions, like, what is it I want to see happening in my lane for this organization?
Yeah,
and is that possible?
Right.
Yeah.
I love that, and I think as well as that safe space and those questions for them to reflect on, there is something, isn't it, for us coaches about, have they also got their own support network? Because leadership can be incredibly lonely isn't
Right.
it? Stuff, because sometimes people only see that thing, and for us to, because one of the things I often say to people also, you know, is that when it comes bringing back that heart bit in, you know, sometimes people are expecting, you know, they want to be treated well, understandably, but sometimes I'm like, does that heart thing go the same way with their leaders? We need to be very compassionate to sometimes the stuff that somebody might well be holding, whatever role that they have, leader, right?
Yeah. And I think, you know, depending on the sector that you're working with, you know, CEOs are juggling a number of balls, right? They're trying to ensure that their board, you know, that their executive board understands their role as achieving their goals and making money or delivering services, but at the same time, they've got to appease shareholders and making sure they're answerable to them. And then they've also got this reputational thing. So they're thinking of lots of different things. And that's why it's really important for them to center themselves. You know, what's leading me? You know, is it ambition? Is it money? Is it fame? What's leading me? And how does that come across in in my interactions? Just so, to me, it's some questions that I think leaders need to constantly ask themselves, to help them get a better understanding of their leadership style and whether they are being inclusive and compassionate when they need to. Because you don't really use the word compassionate in business unless it's in the NHS or somewhere where they're delivering services to the vulnerable communities or something like that. Otherwise, it's hard-nosed, pounds and pence, bottom line. But more and more, we understand that there are certain skills and attributes that people are attracted to and that will draw them to your organization. And authoritative and hard-nosed aren't those attributes. It's empathetic, it's understanding, it's being able to communicate well, compassion. Those are the skills, emotional intelligence, cultural intelligence. Those are the skills and attributes that organizations need, right, as well as the business acumen.
Yeah, because I expect you to have the strategic, the this, the that, especially the higher you go. But then, but we need to have those other things as well. We're heading toward our last few minutes, and thanks so much for this wonderful journey that you've kind of taken us on the lens of your own career and your own observations and the work that you've done. I just wonder, are there any, I want to ask you, are there any pieces of advice you would give to the person who perhaps is starting out and perhaps they in their leadership journey at least, and perhaps particularly let's keep that reluctant kind of leader in mind, because I met many of them, you know, and they're thinking, oh, well, I'd be interested in doing this, but that's going to take me away from this side of work and so on. I remember once, for example, Cherron coaching somebody who's in the NHS, brilliant, you know, saying, oh, my managers are saying that I should take this leadership role, but I could take me so much far from clinical. I said to him, well, might it be the case that also if you're leading, you can still take care of the clinical and to make this impact that you're wanting to have? So any advice that you might have for the person who's perhaps early or thinking about, or people are nudging them to take on a role, a leadership role, and any for those people who perhaps are in the more established stages and perhaps more senior, where they can, not necessarily that senior, but where they can perhaps be affecting more change. And I think you can affect change anywhere. So what about the people, first of all, the people who are starting out, and then any advice for those people who are more established as leaders?
Yeah, I mean, whether you're starting out, whether you are on your leadership journey, it's really important to be clear about what drives you. I can't emphasize that more. What's your values? What you know, what's your North Star? What is it that's in you that drives you to do things in the way you want to do them? Because it's having that clarity that's going to keep you focused when all these adverse things come at you. I would also say, if you're starting out, be authentic. Just be your authentic self. You know, be interested in people, be curious about people. You know, if you're interested in people, you're curious about them and you want to help them in the way you can, people don't forget that. They really don't forget that. So it's really about you know, being interested in and being prepared to help those, even though you may not get thanks. You know, be prepared not to be thanked and ask yourself, am I still going to do this if I don't get any thanks or recognition? And if the answer is yes, then go ahead and do it, because that avoids a lot of disappointment, I think. So I'm okay to do things with people and not be thanked. That's fine. For those of you a little bit more on your journey, I would say there is something about lifting as you climb.
Lovely, lovely way to.
How do you lift as you climb? Because in doing so, you're helping someone or people, but you're also learning about things about yourself and about others as well. And that's how leaders gain followers. Do you understand? Because that you're saying you want to do this, you're not just preaching it, you're actually putting it into action. And people see and hear more than you realize. They're watching. If you may not see yourself as a leader, but others see you as a leader, and they're watching and they're listening, and they want to see if you're consistent. They want to see if you mean what you say and say what you mean, type of thing. So there's a lot of that going on. And I think so, unlike me, it took me ages to get to this point to say, okay, Cherron, you're a leader, just accept it, suck it up, fine, move on. Just accept it and say, okay, with that comes responsibility, as we know from Spider-Man. And it's, what does that look like and what does it feel like? And I think the final thing I would say to anyone who's in the leadership position is to just give yourself a bit of a break, be compassionate to yourself, take time out, just check yourself and make sure that you know who you are, you know where you're going, you know who your support system is and how to access them and what you want from that support system. And just keep reminding yourself, I'm doing this because I want to X or I want to Y. So, yeah.
Wonderful. That's a lovely, heartful bit to enter. But as a coach, I always have to ask, and what would your advice be to yourself, having done the things that you've done? What would you say? What's your advice to yourself at this particular point in your career? What would your advice to self be, Cherron?
My advice to self is, or the words I would say to myself is, well done for embracing the leadership role, pat on the back. That doesn't really change anything for me. It just means I've accepted what others see. But Cherron hasn't changed per se. And I guess I would say never stop thinking that, you can't do more. There's always something you can do, and just keep bringing others along as you go.
I like that. I like that. Lift as you climb. And I was also hearing it muffled in the thing, listen as you climb, and both are required, aren't they? Thanks so much, Cherron. I love that, all of those things. And I think that this talk will be really music to the ears of anyone who is a leader of any way, type or shape or form, including those people who up until now were reluctant leaders, but might be like, they might be saying, okay, I can embrace that. Well, Cherron, thank you so much. And for people looking to find you, what's the best way for people to find you? And of course they can find this book online, but if people are looking to find you,
if they want to find me, just go to my website, www.thepowerofstaffnetworks.co.uk. I'm also
right behind you, and it's right behind you.
There you go. I'm also on Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn, so by all means connect and say hi, and it'd be great to have a chat.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. And thank you so much for Cherron. And thanks for all the wonderful work that you do.
Thank you so much. It's been great. Thanks, Rasheed.